Hi, I'm Amy, Head of Learning and Development and Support at Tradeshield. Credit session, which is balancing growth versus risk. So this session takes a bit of a different angle to what we've been covering. We're going to be looking at credit decisions through the lens of a financial manager or a CFO. And the reason for that is you may be a financial manager or a CFO, or you're in the credit team, and these are the people that have expectations of what you should be thinking like them, so that when we're doing our day-to-days, that we live in that credit department in the same way that you would have your expectations of those senior managers above you. So the core question that we want to focus on today is, how do you know when to say yes to growth or even to a new customer, and when to hold that line, when to say enough is enough or no. And as a business that never extends credit, they don't grow. So if you don't allow for that, and we've spoken about this before as well, to say companies that allow you to trade on credit not only are helping to grow their own businesses, because of course nothing is for free, but they're helping you, the person they're lending credit to grow your business, allowing you an opportunity to make sales with product that you haven't yet paid for. But more than that, that means that if we're helping your business grow and our business is growing, and then we're employing more people, we're contributing towards the economy. And therefore, if we are all in this mindset, and obviously in the perfect world where everyone follows the rules about paying on time, then essentially we're making such a big impact on the countries that we deal with, as well as at the country that we live in. So even cross-border, how that makes such a big difference to those countries as well. So by the end of it, hopefully you'll have a clear framework for thinking about credit decisions the way a CFO would think about them. So it's not just about risk avoidance perspective, but also like a commercial one. So where are we going to go from there? Okay. So let's start with something that every financial manager will recognize, because you have probably sat in that meeting at some point in time where the sales team brings you a deal. And it's a potential big account, and the numbers look really exciting, and they look at you and they're waiting for that credit approval, and you start asking the uncomfortable questions, and suddenly you're the person killing the deal. And sometimes not just the financial manager, but it's the credit team. And we see this contention that takes place between sales and credit all the time, because they're managed on different things. They have different expectations towards the business, one being cash flow and the other one being revenue, and they're very, very different, and so they do tend to butt heads. But here's the thing, so the tension between the sales and the credit team, that is, I think I've seen it across the majority of the companies that we've come into contact with, so it's not a unique issue, and it doesn't go away, and it exists because they're seeing something that is both true on both sides. So sales is right that the revenue opportunity is real, and the credit team is right that the exposure is also real. So whatever we're going to give you, we're also going to be exposed to. In other words, what our business is therefore potentially not going to collect, if you look at it from a slightly negative perspective. So from a CFO's perspective, they're going, every time you're extending credit, you're effectively like financing your customer's operation, okay? Because you may be not giving them physical money, but you're giving them a service, or you're giving them a product, and that is financing their business in a certain way. And so you're spending your working capital on the expectation that it's going to come back, okay, which is any form of a loan. And the question is not just will they pay, it can be, can we afford to carry this if they are slow? Okay, so what will that effect have on our business? So today's session gives us a framework that holds both sides at the same time, saying yes to growth where it makes financial sense, but hold firm when it does not. And that is a difficult conversation to have. So before we talk about the appetite and the frameworks, we need to talk about 3 numbers that should always be on the table before you approve a credit limit. First and foremost, we're looking at gross margin, we're looking at payment terms, and we're looking at cash on hand. So these tell you what you can actually afford in terms of risk. So before you even say yes, you need to know these numbers in order to make that decision. So let's jump into the more specifics. So let's start with gross profit margin. So it's the most underused factor in credit decisions, unfortunately. And I know, Martin, you often talk about your margins. What are your margins? And where is it going to come from? If somebody doesn't pay, it's going to eat into your margins. And so margins means how much am I going to make from this deal? And when someone pays late, it can't come from your day-to-day spend. It can't come from paying rent. It can't come from your actual manufacturing of your product. It can't come from the salaries that you pay your staff. It's going to come from your profit, and that sits in that space. So here is the rule that every CFO should know, and that is, and I just make a disclaimer, I'm not a CFO, but we do work with quite a lot of them. Maybe one day I'll grow into one. Everybody has dreams. No, I'm joking. Okay, so what every credit manager should know is that your gross profit margin is your write-off multiplier. So we've spoken about expected credit losses, and they should be using this as the multiplier. So if you are at a 10% gross margin and you write off 100,000 Rand, you would need 1 million Rand in new revenue just to earn back what you lost. Okay, so it's not turnover, it's revenue that you have to make up against that cost that is going to cost you. So that's what's really important here. So you need to know what that percentage is, and it may differ according to your different terms. So for example, if someone buys on 30 days, your margin may be larger, or if they pay COD, it's going to be even larger versus if they pay on 90 days, because now it's taking longer and longer to collect. Therefore, your margin is getting smaller and smaller. So think about what that means for credit limit approvals. Okay, so if your gross margin on the product line is 15% and you approve a 500,000 Rand credit limit, you're saying that if this customer does not pay, you would need 3.3 million in sales to recover that. So is this sales opportunity worth that risk? That's what we need to be thinking about. So it's not just, oh, we're turning down this potential 500,000 Rand. We're actually looking at that it could cost my business 3.3 million Rand if they don't pay. And then where does that 3.3 million Rand come from if we said yes and then we land up in a situation like this? So that doesn't mean that you never approve a high limit. I definitely don't want to say that. Specifically on low margin accounts, it means that you need to know the true cost of getting it wrong. And, you have to be proud of the things you say no to. And I know our previous CEO, Dominique, he always used to say, in our conferences where we would fight about what should we add to Trade Shield, what should we do different. And I was always that girl who was coming in with the ideas. And I used to get annoyed at some point that he was always saying no. And I was like, why do you always say no? He's like, I say no because sometimes we have to be proud of the things we say yes to, and be proud of them because we said no to all these things, which meant we had the ability to say yes to that. If we said yes to everything, we'd be completely stretched. Go for it, Martin.
Yes, you are touching on such an important point, because we also have those beautiful, big, well-financed, well-established clients out there. But they are going to squeeze that margin that we are talking about. And they're going to squeeze us for terms, which we are going to talk about. And that is always, like you say now, why can't we have the sale? Is it going to cost us in the end of the day, or are we going to make money? Calculate the margin and the cost of that margin. How am I going to make sure that I stay as close as possible to that 10% or 15% margin? What must I do to protect that margin? That's the question we must ask ourselves before we engage with the client.
And even then, we also look at, and from a sales perspective, they have their own calculations. For example, the cost of onboarding a customer, the cost of inquiring the customer. And this is those things that should go into those calculations as well. So it's not just a credit decision, but also how you calculate what it costs to get a brand new customer, and how long would it take for that customer to become a profitable customer. once you have then reached that, what they would refer to as lifetime value. And so this goes in there to say, yes, we have the cost of our salesperson, we have the cost of our onboarding team and our processing team and our whatever, and it's going to take us at least a year worth of their income to cover the cost, what it costs to acquire that new company, and what was the profit margin that we had at that point in time. So there are some things that you could look at, things like pricing. So I know we've mentioned before as well that, you know, you could have different pricing for different terms. For example, if you pay on a COD account, you'd pay R1. If you paid on 30 days, I would charge you R2 for the same product. If you wanted 60 days, I would charge you R3, because obviously we need to make the money in order to extend what it's going to cost our business. So the question is that you need to ask yourself before the approval is, what is the gross margin on this account or this product line? And what does the full write-off at the limit that they've asked for going to cost us in revenue terms? So that's what we need to be looking at. And that's both a sales and a credit calculation that needs to take place. Unfortunately, I think we often see this is that a sales team is not exposed to what the cost of a customer is as well, which could help to say, you know, let's be transparent with our sales team to say, you know, this is why we charge this amount, because this is the cost to acquire a new company, and this is the cost that it would be if there was a write-off. So that would just be a recommendation. So I'm going to pause there for a second. That was a lot, to see if anyone has any questions. If you do, you can pop them into the chat. Martin will pick them up for us, and or Malatabo can also assist you as well, just keeping an eye on it for us. And yeah, we can then touch base there. So the second factor that we have, yes.
You know, while you're pausing there, that's why it's so important for us to also look after our current customers. Absolutely. And make sure they are managed well, because of this expense to get a new customer. So if you lose a current customer, just think about the expense and all your team has to go through to get a new customer. If you look after the current one, you can grow that one and you can make good money out of it. It's all about that relationship. KYC, know your client, and protecting your margin. But if it's a relationship that you have with them, is going to be good. I don't say don't go and look for new clients. Please don't misunderstand me. It's just that it is an expensive little exercise, not just for sales, but also for you in the credit and financial side of the business.
100%. So the second factor here is the cash position and the payment terms. So these two are really the same thing, but looked at from different angles. Okay. And so here is the most important reframing of that. Every time you extend credit, you are not just approving a limit, you are financing your customer's business operations with your own cash, because you would have spent your money to either manufacture a product, purchase a product. Maybe you don't manufacture, maybe you buy a shoe and sell a shoe. Maybe it's a service that you're offering, but that service has a cost. You built a system, you had the developers, there's a cost. And so that's really what we want to be thinking about, is that we are financing each other's businesses using our product or service. So if you pay your suppliers on a 30-day term and, you know, and collect those debtors on 60-day terms, because you're also going to have suppliers that supply your business, and you're going to have your debtors that pay you money, and you need the money from your debtors to pay your suppliers. It's like you know, that chain effect. And so you're finding that there's a gap in your own pocket, because you're then saying, oh, I'm going to give you 60-day terms, but where I've taken our credit, where I'm the debtor, I've been given 30-day terms. So now I need to pay you before you pay me. So where am I going to get that money from? And so we need to make sure that there's that gap is making sense. That's where procurement needs to come in as well. And often we forget that credit teams and procurement teams, they seem to be such separate entities when they should actually be working together to say, we can't accept 30-day terms because we only offer 60-day terms, so we won't have cash on hand. So there needs to be that synergy between those two departments as well. So let's make it a little bit more practical. So a 60-day credit term, so on a 500,000 Rand account, means that 500,000 Rand of your working capital is sitting in your customer's account for 2 months. Okay, and why 2 months? Because terms that go 30 days from statement and somebody gets an order on the 1st of the month, they get their statement on the 30th of that month, and it's only to the end of the following month. If you count the number of days, it's actually 60 days. And so therefore you have to account for it being sitting in their bank account for 2 months. At a cost of 10%, which is the cost of capital, that is 8,000 Rand in financing costs just to carry that data before the risk of non-payment. So that's saying that if we don't include this in our profit margins, the cost of this data just to have the money outside of our account is 8,000 Rand. And that's if they pay on time. Okay, so that's one thing. So the rule of thumb here I'd like to, for setting credit ceilings is that your business should be able to absorb your 3 largest debtors, going slow simultaneously. So without a cash crisis. So if you're going to plan for the doomsday, if you want to call it, you need to be able to sustain your business that if your 3 largest revenue companies are going to pay you late, that you can still have cash on hand. Okay, so that's what you call it, the rainy day fund. So it's not expected credit losses, but it's more about making provisions that we make sure that we can have, running capital to run our business. So that's just a basic thing that we would recommend. So if your current limit do not pass this test, you either need more working capital or you need to tighten up your limits. And that's not a credit decision, but that's really a CFO or business decision to say, how do we manage our cash flow, which is what the CFO's job is all about, to make sure that at the end of the month, they can pay their salaries, they can pay their suppliers, they can pay, for anything else that they would need. And of course, the purchasing and or running of your actual company. And I suppose it's also something you can live with in your day-to-day life. If you could have 3 months' salary saved somewhere, obviously this is in the perfect world, then it allows you to take higher risks knowing, that you have this rainy day fund, if you want to call it. So now let's have a look at, we've looked at the financial inputs. So we've looked at margins, we've looked at cash, we've looked at terms. So just to reiterate, so margins being, how much room have we got to wiggle? Cash being how much money do we have in the bank? And terms is how long do we expect to have the money out of our account? So what are those terms? And the next question is, what are you actually willing to risk? So this is the credit appetite. And at TradeShield, we talk about this all the time. What is your risk appetite for growth? And that lives with the CFO and or even the board level, not just in the credit department, but it would be, what risk can we take because we have made certain provisions to ensure that we can be more risky. So let's jump into that. Okay, so the growth, so we've got growth mode versus preservation mode, meaning like which side are we on? And it can change quarter on quarter, and it also can change between new customers and existing customers. So the credit appetite is not a feeling, it's actually a position. So one that should be set by the CFO or the board to say, this is what we've written down, and it's communicated with the credit team and the sales team, so that we're making sure that we're looking at it on a case to. It's not a case by case situation. We're like, do we want to go down this road? No, we don't. And especially when you're looking at larger companies, like you mentioned earlier, Martin. You may have a company that you really want to do business with them because it looks good to your business to have their name on your website, to be associated with them, but they're going to squeeze you on margin. In other words, they're going to say, can I have longer terms, but I want the pricing of COD. But then that's a decision to say, can I carry that? Am I actually going to make money from this data? Most probably not, but I want them on my books because that opens me up to other opportunities. So there are other decisions that come into play, but you're going into it with your eyes wide open. And so think of it like a dial. On the one end, you have the growth mode, which is higher risk tolerance, more flexibility on terms and on limits. It's a genuine appetite to say, we want to take on new customers even without the perfect payment history, even without, knowing that they're going to make us a lot of money. All of that sits on the growth mode side of things, where we're willing to take on additional risk because we see that sometimes with risk comes reward. And so that's the growth mode side of things. Whereas on the other hand, you're looking at the preservation mode, which is, tightening our criteria, shortening our terms, having security that must be required, and making fewer exceptions when those types of companies come in. So that's the difference, to say, like, we're going to contain what we've got. And even in the Trade Shield risk framework, we're saying, which mode are you in? Are you in the growth mode where you would be more willing to give more? Or are you in the preservation mode, saying, even if you look like the best customer in the world, you're great on paper, you're great with CIPC, your payment terms are great, your financials are wonderful, but we would not give you 100% of the credit limit that you asked for. We'd start small. We'd give you 50% of what you asked for. Then we'd trade with you for 3 months. Then we'd reevaluate you. Then we'd reevaluate at 6 months. So that's more of a preservation mode, where we're going to just tighten up our belt. So neither side is wrong, and both are very valid business positions. And sometimes you can even say, we're on the growth trajectory mode for our existing companies because we have a relationship, and we're on the preservation mode when it comes to new business. Or maybe we're on the other side. We're trying to ramp up our customers, and therefore we're going, excuse the language, but balls to the walls. And we're going to onboard as many people as we possibly can that fit the criteria of what is considered a good customer to us, but we would give them great credit if, that is what is recommended. So both of them can work at the same time, or you can have both growth mode on new and existing customers, or preservation mode on both new and existing customers as well. So neither is incorrect. It's just about, you need to know what is the idea of the growth strategy of the business. And generally speaking, it's nice when companies say, by the end of our financial year end, this is what our growth should look like, and this is how we're going to get there. This is what we need for quarter 1. This is what we need for quarter 2. And that's how we're going to get there. Or we're currently making X. We expect to make X at the end, and that will make us very happy. So that is what you need to decide at, when you're doing your financial year. And it's nice to explain that to your team as well, to say, where are we going as a business and how are we going to get there? A well-run credit function, this is written down. Okay, so as I said, you present it, here at Trade Shield, we present it once a month. Where are we with our goal? How close are we to getting there? What can we do as a business to help get it to where it needs to be? And it should say, our credit appetite is X. New accounts above Y's value require us to get Z. Okay, and this can even live in your credit policy, because the credit policy is a living document. It's constantly moving and it's constantly changing. So we also then can, put exceptions. So above that, if there's a special requirement, then you would go to the CFO. Again, that should be in your credit policy to say, well, if we get one of these things, where do we go to from here? And then it gets revised at least quarterly. So maybe you don't have to do it monthly, but at least quarterly it's being revised to say, do we still want to do this? Do we need to put pressure in this place? Are we reaching that goal? And do we maybe need to be more risk adverse if we have found that the first 2 quarters weren't working for us? So if your debtor days are climbing, and you probably need to move towards the preservation mode for a while, in other words, you may have said yes to lots of things, and now we're seeing that we made some bad decisions, you may want to shift into that preservation mode. So if your cash is strong and the board has set an aggressive revenue target, then growth mode is a legitimate choice, as long as you manage it with the right conditions in place. And that needs to be outlined at the beginning of the process, so that we're not going in blind. And that also helps the sales team to understand when credit says, we're not going to extend credit to this data, or we're not going to extend as much credit to this data, because we're in preservation mode. And these are the rules that we have. So the risk-adjusted credit decision, and we touched on this in the last slide. So this is the framework that pulls everything together, and it's deceptively simple in this format, which is what makes it really powerful. So we've got our low-risk customers, medium-risk customers, high-risk customers, and we've got our full-on decline customers. Okay, so the principle is that the level of conditions that you require should always match a level of risk that you're willing to take on. So I'm not talking about the trade shield, risk adjustment. We have taken this model and put it into the trade shield platform. But for those of you who are not trade shield users, you can do this in your own right to say, what is our scorecard, if you want to call it that. And it could match that. It's not a flat policy for everyone. It's also not like a gut feel. It's a deliberate, documented match between risk and security. Because you may then say, oh, well, we've got credit insurance, so we're willing to take on more risk because we know that we're going to get at least 80% back if we made a bad decision. We've got personal sureties. We're a secure debtor. All these different types of things can influence whether or not you're going to be more risky. Whereas a low risk customer with a strong payment history and a limit that is well within your concentrated guidelines, like your standard terms, it's easy to approve this now. So efficient and commercially sensible because we've put it into our framework and we've said, oh, this is an easy decision to make. Whereas a medium risk customer, so maybe they're new or their limit is significantly, relative to your debtor's book, you have to layer the conditions. So maybe you want to say, well, we'll shorten the terms and we'll build up that relationship. So we could get those personal sureties again. We could say that if you pay us in advance for your first invoice so that we're always ahead of the time, then that would help us as well. So, and then we would do those reviews on a constant basis, at least 6 months into the contract to say, maybe we want to therefore go either way. We want to reduce your credit limit, reduce your terms, or we want to increase your credit limit and or increase your terms, but of course increase your pricing as well. And then of course a high risk customer. So this is a security instrument. So you could still trade with them, but you would reduce their limit. You would require those deposits up front or make them a COD client. So it's not about not trading. It's just about how do we trade. And then some accounts you should just decline. So sometimes, as I said earlier, you just need to say no, which gives you more room to say yes to the ones that you can actually work with and are going to help you with your business as well. So what this framework does is it takes away that subjectivity out of your credit decision. So it's not a personal feeling. It is an algorithm. And it gives you and your team a consistent basis for credit decision making. And it gives your sales a clear conversion about what they need to see in order to move to the next level. So it's not you. This is how we work. And if you don't fit into one of these categories, that's going to be our answer. And again, it's not because Amy doesn't like Martin. It's really a matter of this is the growth of the company, and we're all responsible for that. In Trade Shield, we always say everyone here is in sales, so everything that you do contributes towards that business. Then it's about having the right conversations. So the framework only works if the conversations happen. And honestly, the conversations are where most credit professionals either gain credibility or they lose it. So let's look at the one that matters the most. And as I said before, it's all about transparency from the top down, from the bottom up, and that is just communication. So working with sales and finding the yes. That's what we really want to get to. So how do we find a way to say yes? So the conversation between a credit team and a sales team is one of the most important relationships in your business, and one of the most frequently broken ones as well. So it's usually broken in the same way that credit says no, sales feels blocked, and or that they've wasted their time, and then nothing moves forward because they've wasted 3 months trying to onboard this customer. They finally get the paperwork in, which has been like pulling out your hair, only for credit to say, I'm sorry, we're not going to trade with them. So that can be very, very hard. And here is hopefully a framework that, your job is not just to approve or decline the deals. Your job is to define the conditions under which your business can safely take on the risk. And that's a very different conversation when you're having a conversation with a salesperson to say, we can't actually afford to take on this risk right now because that would dramatically impact our business. So do you want to get paid at the end of this month, Mr. Salesperson? I also want to get paid, and therefore saying no to this customer means that we should have cash in the bank. So it's a very different mindset change. And even as a salesperson, when you're then talking about deals and looking at deals, you're looking at it with that in mind as well. So you can compare the two different responses. Option one is, we can't approve this account. They don't meet our criteria, versus, what can a salesperson do with that? If you're just going to say, oh, sorry, they don't meet our criteria, the salesperson's going to be like, okay, well, now what? So the deal just dies, and the relationship with the credit team gets fractured, because also the salesperson has a relationship with a customer that they've been building. And if somebody just says, not my problem, what is the other person supposed to do with that? So we have to be constructive. Whereas option two says, this deal puts R500,000 at risk at a 10% margin. So a write-off here would cost us 5 million in revenue to recover. And here is what we need to make it work. So it's not a matter of, no, it could be that we're going to give them 30-day terms to start. We're going to ask for personal sureties. We're going to, review them in 6 months. We need financials. We need bank statements. And therefore, it's not a matter of a no or a yes. It's saying, in order to do this, based on the cost, this is what we're going to need, Mr. Salesperson. And so everybody's under the same banner. We're trying to make it work, and this is how we're going to do it, as opposed to, oh, well. So some underlying risk positions that we could look at that are completely different, in conversation, is option two. You have framed the risk in language that sales can use. You've given them something to go back to the client with as well, to say, Mr. Customer, based on what you've asked us for, this is where we are. We want to do business with you. We appreciate the relationship, and this is what we're going to need in order to do this. And flip it on the other side. If you're somebody who's applying for credit because you're a supplier of somebody else, think about that as well, what you're going to cost that business. And if you're paying late, and if you don't want to give your financials, these are things that affect other people. And I have said it before, and I'm going to consistently say it again, that the change starts with every single person on this call. We are all businesses. We also buy on credit. Therefore, we can change the narrative by being more open as well, so that we can help our customers or our suppliers do what they need to do to make that decision. So when do we hold the line? Now we're saying, okay, great, we know when we're going to say yes, but when do we say no? So knowing when to push back is important as knowing when to say yes. So this is how we're being financially grounded on what actually matters to our business. So let me be a little bit direct here. Not that you should be surprised about me being direct, but holding the line is not an obstruction. It's a financial stewardship. It's you doing your job. It's protecting the business from the risk that the sales team may not be equipped to know or to fully evaluate. So it is your job as a credit controller or a CFO to know when to say no. So we have given you some 5 different, situations where you could or should be firm when holding the line. So first and foremost, you can't verify the business. So if you can't verify a business, therefore you should not trade with them. In other words, we don't know who you are legally. You refuse to give us any updated information. You don't want to sign our terms and conditions, or you scratch out everything that's actually important to us. There's no financial statements that were given. There's no identifiable directors, for example. Therefore, it's a non-negotiable that this customer would be a COD. So it's not even a no, it's no to credit. It's not no to trading altogether. So it could be COD or cash in advance. The second thing that we want to do is anything that is adverse at the credit bureau. So for example, judgments. Maybe you have a rule that says if you have judgments that are larger than certain values, we won't trade with you. Or sometimes people say if you have judgments at all, we won't trade with you. And so these are default data to tell us that we should be more cautious. The third thing we should look at is the concentrated risk. So if this one account will represent 20% of your debtors book, which is a huge amount, then you have a structural problem regarding your credit worthiness and how they look. Because if they do default, that could severely impact your business and your day-to-day. So when onboarding a huge customer like that, make sure that we don't put all our eggs into one basket. The fourth is the margin. So the margin that does not support the risk, so that we need to be sure that if our margins are too small for the terms that we are offering, we're going to land up in a situation that if we write off bad debt, therefore we're going to land up in a negative side. So where our business is negatively impacted. And then the fifth one is if it's the only argument for approval is we will lose the deal, so the salesperson comes and says, but we'll lose the customer if we don't give them what they asked for right now, that is commercial pressure. It's not a credit argument. So you can be sympathetic to it, and I'm sorry, Mr. Salesperson, that you worked really hard, but it does not overrule the financial analysis that we have. And sometimes losing the customer is the better option, even if it isn't the nicest option. So here's some takeaways that we're going to leave you with. So number 2 is set your credit appetite at the right level. This belongs with your CFO and or your executives, whether it's a board or a team of people, whatever you want to call it. It's not with an individual credit manager making this up. But what I would recommend is that they are doing it together, so that you have the person on the ground, which is your credit manager, your credit controllers, you're on the ground, you know what's happening, as well as where the direction of the business needs to go. And then write it down. So what did you decide that we're going to do for this year? And are you in the growth mode or the preservation mode? And what does that mean? And how long are we going to be there for? Okay. And then we're looking at number 3, which is always match the risk to the security. So low risk gets standard terms, medium risk gets special conditions, high risk gets securities or declines. And that is not being conservative. It's about being, it's about being smart, making smarter decisions. You also have rules and regulations, which we've spoken about, which is not doing any reckless lending, because you are also responsible to make sure that you are trading responsibly according to the NCA. You have what's the word I'm looking for? You have an obligation to make sure that you do this correctly. And then, of course, we have the person who makes the deals happen safely. So speak the language of the business, offer the path forward, saying, this is where we are, Mr. Customer. This is what we need, Mr. Customer. And then hold that line if that is what it requires. So very, very important. What I will also be doing for you is we have put together a few different calculators that might help you, a credit risk appetite statement that might help you, and maybe some checklists that will help you. So we will then take this recording that we'll put onto our knowledge center, and we'll attach some of this helpful information if you would like to look at it and see how am I going to put this into my day-to-day business as well. And of course, as always, Martin and myself, as well as anyone at TradeShield, is always available to have a conversation with you to say, how do we do this? Can you help me create our credit policy? Martin is absolutely the man to go to for your credit policies. So we are here to help you, and of course we're always here to support you. So if you've got questions, pop us a message at the support mailbox. And are there any questions? I don't see any questions, but I'll open it up and pause there for a second. And of course, Martin, for your valuable insight in which you can add, being the guy on the ground, having done this with credit teams, with CFOs, your advice is always welcome.
Well, there's nothing more heartbreaking for a salesperson who has worked on a deal for such a long time, and he then walks into the credit office with a smile so big if he didn't have ears, his head will fall off, only to have his bubble popped by someone in credit that says, this person is not credit worthy, we can't trade with you. I've always had the philosophy, rather look for a reason to do business than a reason not to do business. And that is difficult, because now you start looking at things as, what are we going to do? What additional things? I mean, you and I had a conversation yesterday about a client who wants to open an account. And
Yes.
What can we tell them?
Yeah.
Work close together. They will understand these things and work hand in hand with one another.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because, and that example that we had yesterday was an excellent one where it was a brand new company that it separated and became its own legal entity. And now they're trying to take out credit when they only opened up their company in July and they have no financials, they have no banking information. And so the buyer, the actual customer said, how can I do this right? Which was absolutely refreshing to say, can you guide me to say, what can I do to make this work? Okay, Mr. Customer, you are 50% owned by a larger corporate. Can we get a cross-company guarantee from them? And so there are things that we can do that outline to say, you don't have what we need, but we could do it like this. Would your directors sign personal surety? So there's often also that communication that happens between the buyer and Trade Shield, for example, to say, maybe we have some advice or guidance that we can help you with so that we can make it work. Or Mr. Customer, like, you would have to understand why we would choose to then recommend that we put you on COD for the first 6 months because you don't have somewhere for us to evaluate you. And so it was just being completely honest.
And those recommendations, Amy, has got very little labor intensity to manage the securities. Remember, I always say, when you start going the security level, there's time and costs about it. So if I have a cross-company guarantee, that means I just diarize it for the next 6 months. I can look at it if it's a 6 months thing, and 6 months time I say, yeah, this guy's fine now. We don't need the cross-company guarantee anymore. But if you have a notarial bond or things like that, it's a constant working effort that you've got to go and review those things. But these things that we're talking about now is something that you put in place, and it gives you that comfort that you can now trade with this new buyer of yours or new client. I mean, the company that we were talking about, I mean, it's a massive business on the side that's the 50% owner. And we can say, so you are a little price girl, so we can give it on. No, will that name support what they say, or will they support the subsidiary? Remember, it's not a division; it's a subsidiary. It's a standalone business. So will they support it? And I'm sure they will. And I'm sure they will say, yeah, we'll pay their debt, because otherwise they wouldn't have taken a 50% share in them. But still, for everybody, all the auditors, when they come and look at your books later, and they say, how did you make this decision? On what did you base this decision? Oh, they 50% owned by so. That means nothing. Because if the company goes bad, those holding companies go, bye, because they have got nothing. They're making a loss because they're losing their share, and they're in that business. But they will not carry the debt. Not always. Sometimes they do.
Absolutely.
There you go.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, that brings us to the end of today's session. And as always, we are so grateful to have you online to share your knowledge and your experience. I hope you know that it's not only about when Martin and I are speaking, but you are the people on the ground. You're experiencing this, and we want to hear from you too. So don't be shy. And otherwise, we bid you farewell, and we will see you next week, Thursday, back here for another session. Have a great day, everyone. And for those who haven't filled out the poll, you can